Xpress Platform 13 is the Vekoma launch coaster at Walibi Holland. This ride famously has the same layout as Disney's Rock and Roller Coaster, just placed outdoors. While this may hurt the ride experience, I think this coaster may actually have some better theming than Disney's coaster. Let me explain in this review. Premier Parks purchased Walibi Flavo in 1998. Premier also owned the Six Flags brand. In 2000, this Dutch park was rebranded as Six Flags Holland, and it was gifted with an astonishing 23 new rides, including 4 different roller coasters. Arguably the most impressive of the bunch was Superman the Ride, a Vekoma launch coaster. This was the first modern launch coaster built in the Netherlands. The ride was originally painted green and was supposed to be named Riddler's Revenge, but Europeans weren't as familiar with the Batman villains, so the ride was instead painted red and blue, and named after the more familiar Man of Steel. But that name did not last long. Six Flags was heading towards bankruptcy after the massive spending spree, and they sold the European parks in 2004. This caused the coaster to lose the DC Comics branding, so the coaster was instead renamed Xpress. The coaster was closed for the entire 2011 season due to cracks in the launch stators, so the park took the opportunity to paint the coaster black. But the bigger change occurred just 3 years later in 2014. The ride was named Xpress Platform 13 and themed to a haunted subway. The end of the queue line was basically turned into a haunt. You walk through an ominous and creepy subway. Along the way, there are some timed screen effects and loud noises that'll startle most guests. I honestly think this part of the queue line is better themed and more enjoyable than any part of the Rock and Roller Coaster queue line. Because this portion of the queue is basically an attraction in itself, the park strategically places the fast lane merge point right before it. Therefore, most of your wait in the standby queue will take place right before that. And this ride can garner 30 to 45 minute waits most days. The line tends to spike right after opening because this is the closest coaster to the main entrance. The ride's entrance is weirdly located inside an indoor mall. Everyone must pass through here to reach the rest of the park, so most people decide to make Xpress their first stop of the day. If you aren't one of the first people in line, it is prudent to return later in the day when the line will inevitably die down. The end of the queue line leads to a narrow set of waiting gates where you can select a row. It is one of the few coasters at this park where you can freely pick your own row, and I would recommend the front. The forces feel identical across the train, but those up front get the rush of wind on the launch and an unobstructed view of the layout. You have giant walls blocking the ride platform until it's your turn to board, adding a sense of mystery to the experience. And this ride is pretty darn hard to see in general. While it has a decent overall height at 85 feet or 26 meters, Xpress cannot be seen from any of the park's midways. This is because it's set on a pond in a backstage area surrounded by trees. The only ways you can see this attraction from accessible areas are from a small gap in the trees while walking along the parking lot, the exit ramp for the Rio Grande Rapids ride, and atop the park's tallest attractions. The ride used to be more visible back in the Superman days. The end of the queue line station were open back then. In fact, the launch used to be completely exposed as well. Now all these elements are enclosed in a tunnel. When it's your turn to board, you board a familiar set of Vekoma trains. This coaster can operate with 2 trains at a time. Each train has 6 cars, and each car is 2 rows of 2, so it can seat upwards of 24 riders per cycle. Once you're seated down, you're secured by an over-the-shoulder harness. No secondary seatbelts here. As I go through the ride experience, the elements and forces are identical to those on Rock and Roller Coaster in Florida and Avengers Flight Force in Paris. Just put the coaster outdoors, take away the bits of theming, and remove the onboard audio. Once dispatched, you round a corner and head into a tunnel. You'll hear some droning subway sounds and an alarm that increases in intensity. At the same time, rainbow-colored lights flash all around you. Then, with little warning, you start accelerating down the launch track. It was one of the earliest LSM launches out there, but it's fairly reliable and it has some solid yank to it. It accelerates you from 0 to 56 miles per hour or 90 kilometers per hour in just 2.8 seconds. You are blinded by the light as you emerge outdoors and then charge through a sea serpent. You slow down at the top of the element, but you get some crushing positive Gs entering and exiting the double inversion. This coaster hits a posted 5 Gs, and this is almost certainly where it happens. Do not be surprised if you start to gray out here. You then navigate this big bank turnaround devoid of forces. The turn then continues upwards. It gets very tight at the top, inducing some laterals. On the Disney versions, you head through a mid-course brake run. On Xpress, you don't have a brake run here, so you just awkwardly have a bit of straight track high above the ground. You then continue onwards into the next part of the layout. You twist downwards and navigate another large bank turn. Neither are particularly memorable. You then careen through a nice corkscrew. It's pretty dizzying after the repeated spirals. You may get a pinch of headbanging here, but nothing too bad. You then wrap around the layout again and head into what is actually a mid-course brake run in this one. The coaster then has one more lap. It's one last loop around the layout, but there are these 2 little humps along the way that come close to giving weightlessness. You then head into a tunnel and slam into the brakes, but something is lurking inside. On the slow return back to the station, you pass an old subway train that starts to rumble and shake. It's a neat practical effect you cannot see coming. On the Disney versions, you head to a separate unload platform. On Walibi Holland's version, you head right back to the original load platform. This ends the 3,267 foot or 996 meter long coaster, but you do have a cool reveal at the end. When the exit doors open, you find yourself in a gift shop. Remember, this coaster's entrance is back in that mall. The dramatic change in scenery makes it feel as if you've actually taken a train elsewhere. In terms of smoothness, Xpress is shockingly smooth for a Vekoma coaster built 2 decades ago. It tracks much better than their older boomerangs and SLCs. There is very little head banging at all. In terms of pacing, Xpress does not fare as well. After an exciting start, the coaster really mellows out. Much of the layout consists of meandering. This is masked on the Disney version since you're in the dark environment with some theming, but you can see everything coming on Xpress. The spaghetti bowl layout just isn't as punchy as the version from Premier Rides. However, Xpress does have an underrated element of fear you cannot get in Rock 'n' Roller Coaster. This ride has many sections of low clearances, so you have some genuinely terrifying head choppers as you spiral about. You can appreciate these near misses on the Disney ones in the dark. So what would I rate Xpress Platform 13? I would give the coaster itself a 6 out of 10, but I'll bump the overall experience score to a 7 because of the queue line. That queue and story build-up is excellent. It's a really neat theme executed well. As for the coaster, the initial launch and Sea Serpent are great, but the rest of the coaster doesn't really do too much for me minus the corkscrew. The final 3/4 of this coaster is a seemingly never-ending series of forceless turns. It is a shame this coaster couldn't sneak in some wilder transitions or better drops for variety. I prefer Rock 'n' Roller Coaster overall because it's a more immersive experience start to finish, but Xpress has its moments and it's well worth experiencing. So those are my thoughts on Xpress Platform 13, the Vekoma launch coaster at Walibi Holland. What are your thoughts on this coaster? Do you prefer this, Rock 'n' Roller Coaster, or Avengers Flight Force? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate it if you gave this video a like, and you considered subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.